The avalanche's rigging creaked and the seagulls wailed as Arya's ship approached the Titan of Braavos. Arya was topside as she concentrated for the welcoming announcement she first heard as a little girl nearly 20 years ago. Within minutes, the low groan filled the harbor as their midday anchorage was near. The avalanche lowered its sails to disguise the Stark sigils, as Arya did not want to announce their moorage. Lady Mira quickly approached her, staring upward as they passed below the mighty Titan.
How on earth did they manage that?
No one knows,
Claimed Arya, slightly smirking on her turn of phrase. Clearly she was feigning ignorance as to the origin of the Titan.
It's constructed of granite and bronze. It is the first line of defense for the Free City, a means of protection from those who desire the return of slavery to the civilized world.
Arya offered to Mira's obvious amazement. Arya stared up at the Titan, remembering its face as the sigil of House Baelish. Arya remembered Lord Varys's warnings. Littlefinger was still manipulating their current events from beyond the grave. Arya tightened her grip on Catspaw, the blade that spilled Peter Baelish's blood in Winterfell's Great Hall and put an end to his schemes. Or so Arya thought at the time. No sooner had Lord Varys crossed her mind, he had presented himself topside, followed closely by Nymeria. Sir Davos had set the maneuvering watch at daybreak to ensure a smooth docking process. Arya had superseded his recommendations of a full broadside docking. Arya had demanded they anchor in the harbour and set skiffs ashore. This tactic was common for those who did not carry supplies or stores to offload, and whose voyage was more diplomatic rather than logistical. Arya concluded this would attract less attention. The faceless man's coin that rested in her pocket was proof they were expecting her return to Braavos.
A nostalgic return, I assume, my future queen.
Lord Varys inquired as the anchor splashed into the harbour. Deckhands scattered as Sir Davos barked orders to get Lady Arya ashore as quickly and as quietly as possible.
Under different circumstances, perhaps, how did Jon respond to your past transgressions?
Arya inquired, knowing full well she was unlikely to receive a fully truthful answer from the spider.
Given my throat is still intact. Better than I would have anticipated.
Varys laughed, which then garnered Arya's full attention. The deckhands lowered the skiff to the waterline as Nymeria became nervous at Arya's assumed departure.
He could have blamed you for our father's death. Fortunately, he saw through his frustration to recognize your benevolence. As do I.
Arya finished as she stared out over the harbour. Lord Varys bowed slightly in recognition of her indifference. Arya assumed to hear his retort, but the spider was too wise to talk away the tension resting topside.
Will you be accompanying me ashore, my lord?
For a short time, Your Grace. I also have sources here in Essos. But most have gone quiet ever since the stirring of the Fiery Hand.
The slave army of R'hllor?
Arya asked intently and immediately was drawn out of her daydream.
Legend says their number's at 1,000. No more, no less.
In the slave city of Volantis, 'tis is true. But there are many other cities where the slavers grow their numbers. My birds sing of tens of thousands. And they are stirring.
Lord Varys trailed off to Arya's displeasure.
I will venture into the city and gather what intelligence is offered to me. Few know my face these days since my rebirth. If you are fortunate enough to recover Lord Brandon and safely return him to your ship, please do not hesitate to leave without me. I can manage my own way home.
Varys finished as Arya noticed the red ruby sparkling from his hairy chest. The red woman Melisandre gave up her youthful form to restore Varys's during the battle for the Dawn many years ago.
Godspeed to you then, Lord Varys.
Arya offered to Varys's low bow. Arya then turned her attention to Lady Mira.
You will stay on board with Nymeria. I will send for you if needed. It is necessary for me to blend with the common folk, which I dare say will be too much to ask of you.
Arys lamented and Mira silently nodded her head. Arya patted Nymeria before grasping the rope ladder leading her over the side of the avalanche's railings. Moments later, the oars slapped the water of the Braavos harbour as Arya pulled her hood over her head. Lord Varys soon did the same. After a few minutes of rowing, their skiff bumped ashore as Varys was the first to pull himself onto the docks. The deckhands maintaining the shoreline were the first to greet the spider. A sleight of hand and an exchange of gold limited the questions likely to be asked of their purpose in Braavos. Once Arya had steadied her feet on the docks, Lord Varys had disappeared from her sight. A smirk streaked across Arya's face as she imagined the mischief Varys was capable of now that he had returned to his homeland. Arya quickly removed herself from the shoreline and made her way into the market, a common place for travelers and those unaccustomed to the ways of the locals. Arya approached those of lower social standing, beggars and whores, laborers and fishermen, all the while paying for the slightest bit of information. Arya was more than capable of changing her form, but in the likelihood she would cross another faceless man, she would rather not draw that attention to herself. Her limited time with the assassins led her to believe there were secrets that would be revealed in time. Jaqen himself could wear the face of a person who was still living, a skill Arya was never privy to. If she attempted now to conceal her identity, a fellow face may be able to recognize her as one of their own. As Arya pondered these questions, the sun had set, and the night markets came to life. It was more difficult to stay concealed as the streets were now packed with criminals and customers alike. Arya noticed a cloaked man facing her at a distance. She assumed he was following her. Whenever she moved, he shadowed her. As she would pause, he would also. After numerous turns, he remained a few paces from her, facing her, always facing her. The busy street noise seemed to melt away as she gulped and decided to approach him, or maybe her. As Arya rounded a lemon street cart, the hooded stranger was no longer behind it. Arya was confused, but all was revealed moments later. The hooded figure spoke in a familiar voice.
"You track far too slowly, boy,"
the voice said, and Arya smiled widely and continued the conversation as she turned to face the hooded man.
I am a girl.
Arya responded as the man lowered his hood, revealing the straight white teeth and bushy black hair of her once dancing master.
"And here I thought you were a sword,"
responded Syrio Forel to Arya's amazement. Arya stepped forward to embrace him, but then thought better of it, remembering where she was and who could be watching.
I have so much to tell you.
Arya cried to Syrio's continuous warm smile.
"I've heard of your endeavors, young one, but I must ask what would possess you to return to the Free City?"
Can I trust you?
Arya asked, and she longed for proper excuse too. Any answer would do. She wanted to have him back. Then again, anyone who studied her past could have known this information. Syrio seemed to understand this. He could always understand, Arya thought. Syrio then lowered himself to a knee, facing Arya eye to eye.
"I faced a white cloak and 4 men-at-arms with a wooden sword to offer you an escape. But if that is not enough..."
Syrio trailed off and offered to Arya's hand. He encouraged her to touch his face, and Arya obliged.
"Remove it if you can,"
Syrio ordered, allowing Arya to remove the face she thought him to be wearing. To Arya's relief, it was living flesh, Syrio's face, and his alone. Arya threw caution to the wind and embraced her dancing master.
"What would lead you here, child?"
Syrio asked with interest, but he almost seemed disappointed.
My brother, he was taken by the Faceless Men. They left this for me to find. I think they want me here.
Arya pleaded and handed the coin to Syrio. He examined it closely and quickly returned it to her.
"Then we must not keep our hosts waiting. To the House of Black and White, my child."
Syrio smiled and quickly turned up the street. Arya quickened her pace to keep up with him. For numerous city blocks, both master and apprentice sidestepped beggars and street performers. The house came into view, down on the water. Arya was confused as she knew they could not just walk through the front gate. Syrio rounded the house numerous times, always keeping a city street away. Finally, Syrio stopped on the backside of the building when he finally spoke, breaking the long silence.
What was it? What was it you wanted to tell me?"
I've continued your teaching to my daughter.
Arya felt stupid leading with that particular fact. Never mind, the god of life met her personally and selected her one of 7 to represent all of mankind in a fight to the death. Yeah, better leave that for later. Arya mocked herself in her own head.
"Dresses or swords?"
Syrio asked, and the answer made Arya stand up straight again.
A bit of both. She's a proper lady, and a proper warrior. She trains well. She may have even become my equal.
Arya smiled, and Syrio returned it yet again, though he refused a retort. The pair came upon a narrow drainage pipe, barely an arm's length across. Syrio gestured to her, and Arya was confused. Impossible a fully grown man could scurry up the pipe and gain access to the house. Syrio seemed to know her thoughts as he continued.
You will find your brother, child. Follow the mind's eye, and the Titan of Braavos will guide you.
Arya thought on his words. Perhaps it was his accent, she thought, as her own eye rose to see the Titan of Braavos standing tall above all the other buildings in Braavos.
Don't you mean mind's eye?
Arya asked, and Syrio laughed at the question.
No, child. All will make sense when you enter.
Syrio answered, and it felt like more of a goodbye than anything else.
My ship is at anchor in the harbor. Go to it. Come back with me. We have so much to discuss.
All in time, child. We will speak again, I assure you.
Syrio smiled, and his bright white teeth simply glowed in the moonlight. Before Arya could protest, she double-checked for the faceless coin in her pocket and submerged herself waist-high in the drainage runoff. Arya refused to think of what she was wading through as she came upon the small pipe. The water rushing out was no more than a steady trickle. It was just tight enough to not allow her to crawl. Arya lay on her back and slithered up the pipe for what seemed like hours. Arya lay in darkness until the pipe opened into a collection tank, which smelled worse than anything Arya had ever witnessed. She could now stand and could feel the squishing of God knows what below her boots. 3 exit tunnels left the collection tank. Arya would have to guess correctly. One from the kitchen, another likely from the privies, and the last likely from the collection pool in the main chamber. The one that smelled the least would likely lead her to the main chamber. The center pipe Arya collected and led her exactly to where she thought. The pipe was wide enough to crawl and sloped downward. The water level rose to her chin as the main chamber came into view. She emerged into the pool and looked up to the statue of the gods surrounding her, alone back inside the house of black and white. Arya stood and climbed out of the pool, soaked to the bone as the clothes dripped water onto the stone floor, echoing loudly. Arya took in the room. There was never more than a handful of men inside the house, it had always seemed. She approached the double doors leading to the Hall of Faces. She pushed upon the double doors. To her surprise, they failed to make a sound. It also seemed empty. Some hosts, Arya thought. To be invited back to Braavos only to not be met with a face or a blade seemed awkward to her. She looked upon the collection of faces, most old and familiar, some slightly newer, she thought. In the center of the hall sat stacks of iron coins, similar to the one left behind for Arya to find. It had been years since Arya received the original from Jaqen himself, but these coins seemed different from the one residing in her pocket. These coins were made of iron, cold, dark, and rusty. Hers was made of silver. Arya had not noticed that before. It was then that Arya realized what Syrio's words meant. The Titan will guide you, she remembered. Follow her mind's eye. Silver. The silver mines in the industrial part of the city. That's where Bran is. He's in the silver mines, Arya yelped. This had garnered someone's attention. The benefit of such a large hall was loud footsteps. Arya had what she came for and broke for the drainage pipe in the main chamber. As she fled from prying eyes, Arya entered the main chamber to find the front doors, towering 3-story doors, one made of pale weirwood and the other dark ebony. The doors were wide open, seemingly inviting Arya to leave, and leave peacefully.